Before we start, since this is a long video, there are timestamps in the description for the topics discussed. Feel free to skip ahead to whatever interests you. And also, there is a part 2 coming soon that touches on the issues I have personally with the bunker base meta, so stay tuned. Welcome to Rust's base building scene, where you see the same expensive bases boasting 30k stone and metal frags, claiming 50 rocket raid costs through all the doors just to salvage every last little bow kit, when in reality it's only one wall straight to their box of sulfur. Or maybe it's the bases that require armoured doors, garage BPs, 70 gears, ladders, reinforced windows as a replacement for every doorway even though they have 0 external TCs, 700 high qual, plus an additional 21k frags for all the doors and code locks that are conveniently left out of the cost. Maybe it's the inconvenient designs that have you spending 90% of your wipe on 300-second bag timers just to be able to access all of the loot stored in your secure suicide bunkers. Or it's the people who just assume Rust is this fantasy game where you're only ever raided under perfect conditions, when all your garage doors and bunkers are closed, bulletproof windows are on, when you're never having to run frantically through your base, leaving doors open to stop enemies from getting deeper. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at what happens when Sir Winter encountered one of Tronans' base designs that claimed to be 150 satchels or 32 rockets to raid.
Holy metal! He always sulfur box of sulfur!
That's right, one metal wall to an entire box of sulfur. Well, hang on a second, that's only one of the 4 main loot rooms in the base. Well, you've just made your entire raid cost back, and I don't know how you build your bases, but my raid cost assumes the raiders take the path of least resistance to the most important loot, especially if your base is on YouTube. At that point, you might as well have the hyperlink plastered on a sign on the side of your base. And yes, it isn't all of the loot in the base, but are you seriously going to measure your raid costs based off of how many bow kit loot rooms they hit? Especially when it could have easily been made more difficult to raid by adding 1 layer of honeycomb, 2 walls and 1 foundation? Now, this may be an older build, but it still does reflect the problems with the current bunker base building scene, where a large number of building creators are disingenuous about their costs, don't raid their bases properly, and never account for any online scenarios. Now, of course, there are honest creators out there, but the base building scene is quite convoluted with many dishonest creators who pump out videos like it's some sort of Reddit repost channel, and who just straight up lie about their costs and the effectiveness of their base. Now, perhaps you're unaware of how many of these creators make these mistakes. So, how about we take a look and evaluate some of the bases that are out there. And yes, all of them are recent, no base is more than 4 months old. So, let's create a criteria to judge how efficient and effective a base is. Firstly, let's judge a base by how expensive the raid cost is to one main loot room in TC, then to all main loot rooms. Next, let's judge a base's online raid capabilities. And finally, how cost effective that base is for its raid cost and utility. A lot of people claim their bases can withstand 70 plus rockets because of the fact that they have multiple loot rooms. The base on screen is a legitimate 48 rocket raid to the loot room from all directions. However, this is how normal 48 rocket raids look. This is a concept I like to dub loot room roulette, which is having the raider raid multiple loot rooms to get all of the valuables. In most floor plans, this is around 4 different loot rooms and a TC. So, for the price of one of those group bases that tend to cost around 20k metal frags and have a raid cost of say 50 rockets, you could probably build 4 or 5 of these small bunker bases and it would cost around 120 rockets to get to all of your loot. Most veteran builders will tell you that building multiple small bases is better as opposed to one large base. There are a couple of reasons for this. The main one is the fact that honeycombing past 2 to 3 layers becomes far too expensive for small groups. Large groups can afford 3 to 4 layers, but beyond that, the cost to honeycomb exponentially increases to a point where it's just not worth building. You can visually see this in action, as the honeycomb around one loot room gets exponentially bigger, and not to mention, so does the upkeep cost. The second biggest issue is the increase in decay cost past the placement of 15 blocks on a singular structure. Once more than 15 blocks on a singular structure have been placed, the decay upkeep cost will increase the tax rate depending on the amount of blocks you have. So for the first 15 blocks, the upkeep cost is 10% of the build cost. From 15 to 115 blocks, the upkeep is up to 15% of the total build cost. That's 15% at 115 blocks and say 14% at 73 blocks. From there, at 220 blocks, the upkeep cost is 20% of the build cost, and so on. Now these rates are subject to balancing changes, so don't take them for being 100% accurate. So, for example, if you have a base that costs 21.9k stone and is made up of 73 blocks, that's walls and square foundations, the upkeep cost would be 14% of 21.9k, which is 3066 stone. Now it's pretty self-explanatory why Decay works like this, as it allows smaller group bases to be more on an equal playing field to the big clans, as they can't sustainably build behemoths. So, then you can conclude that it is more ideal to build small, as if you armor your core and build everything else in stone, the upkeep cost for HQM will still increase as your base expands. Now pair this with the honeycomb dilemma and you can see that splitting your base into bunker loot room bases and shooting floor bases is ideal, as it drastically decreases the upkeep cost. However, there are obvious drawbacks to this approach, such as convenience, transferring loot, crafting without having to leave your base, and TC placement range. Now, before we get into these reviews, to be clear, I don't hold anything against any of these creators I criticize, nor am I saying that it represents their content in its entirety, but I'm here to point out a larger problem I see with the base building scene. So, without further ado, let's start some of these reviews. Let's take a look at our first small group base from creator Papa Percocet. This base costs 27k frags, 320 HQM and 7k wood, which Papa Percocet explicitly states is not including deployables. Now I'll give him props for at least mentioning that he didn't include deployables in his cost, but if deployables have an impact on that raid cost, then they 100% should be included. Now I understand if you don't include things like chest, shells, furnaces, bags, or even sometimes embrasures, because realistically most raid costs aren't affected by these items, but if we're talking about garage doors, code locks, sheet metal doors, and reinforced windows, they should absolutely be included. In total, the important deployables add an extra 8,550 frags, 48 HQM, and 31 gears. Furthermore, adding to this cost is the large list of BPs requiring a ladder and ladder hatch, which arguably are optional, armoured windows which are just useless and restrict visibility, garage doors which are far more common but you certainly won't have an abundance early wipe, and reinforced windows. For a total of around 34k frags, this base lacks quite a bit of utility, and even though Papa Percocet said it's up to you how you customize this base, there really isn't much space, considering your second floor is the shooting floor. This base has only 5 loot rooms, which for 34k frags is pretty poor, especially when you can just remove some of the costs by taking out unnecessary honeycomb like these roofs here on every side, as they add nothing to the raid cost when you use splash damage. This base does do an alright job with its defenses, as it provides 4 turret ports and shooting floors that have an almost 360 degree cover from attackers. The roof doesn't really have any peeking areas, so it's alright, but it's quite easy for attackers to gain control over. Now, while this base includes a bunker, it is sadly outdated, and the raider can bypass it by using incendiary rockets or X-Bomber to destroy the wooden half wall holding it up. Now this base claims to have a 50 to 60 rocket raid cost to get all of the loot. Well, how about we put that to the test? First, let's destroy the garage doors, then the sheet metal door, for a total of 213 expo ammo. Then, rocket either the left or the right corner with 8 rockets. At this point, the metal wall and the sheet metal double doors will have been destroyed. Then, continue to rocket this corner, and 8 rockets later, you should be into the suicide bunker. This should give you access to all of the most important loot, and TC, for a total cost of 16 rockets and 213 extra ammo. But we still have 4 loot rooms to go, so pump another 8 rockets into the HQM floor, and you'll be into the main bunker section. Then splash damage the 2 garage doors with 3 more rockets. With TC access, you should be able to pick up the windows and get into the first 2 loot rooms. Then destroy one of the last garage doors for 150 extra ammo, and you'll get into the last 2 loot rooms by removing the wooden half wall for the stability bunker. This should total 27 rockets and 363 extra ammo, which is quite a lot cheaper than the suggested 50 to 60 rocket raid cost. Now, the real reason it's so much cheaper is the fact that there is a lack of external TCs. It is a simple rule that if you have a base that requires the use of reinforced windows, then you need to have external TCs for it to work. So, let's see how we can improve this base a little. So to improve, let's first add an optional roof and sniper tower expansion that provides a room for bed and lockers, better peek downs, long distance sniper tower views, heli landing areas, heli pickups, and rocket hiding spots, as well as better SAM turret angles. This only costs 10.7k stone, 400 frags, 2 rope and 3k wood, but it can be built in sections and as early or as late into a wipe, as it has no impact on the raid cost. Next, let's switch the armored windows for a combination of embrasures and reinforced glass. This will save you 48 HQM and only cost 1.5k frags. Now when you need to use the shooting floor, you will have increased visibility, and if you're worried about window rays when you're offline, you can chuck on the reinforced glass. This brings the total raid cost through the windows up to 8 rockets, the same as a metal wall, if you place the embrasures on the inside of the base. That's 2 more rockets than you would have if you used these armored windows. This now gives more protection, greater visibility for a lower cost, and for easier to obtain BPs. Then let's add in the very important external TCs for either the small cost of 1,425 stone per TC, plus an additional 1.4k stone for a 7-day upkeep, or the metal cost of 1,250 frags, plus an additional 900 for upkeep. This will drastically increase the raid cost of this base, and is necessary for any base that relies upon reinforced windows for defense. Then let's remove some of the unnecessary honeycomb. First, let's remove these roofs adjacent to the walls on every side and instead replace them with stone. As you can see, when you use splash damage, they have 0 impact on the raid cost and are only used for ways to jump up into your base. Next, you should either armor the floor of each of these loot rooms, or remove this last roof section of honeycomb, as it adds an unnecessary third layer that if you go through the windows and then splash damage both floors for only 16 rockets, becomes instantly redundant. In this case, it's not that much more expensive to upgrade the floors to armored for an additional 52 HQM, although I would only do this later on into a wipe. Now, if you want to save even more metal, although your stone costs might start to get a little steep, then you should remove all of the metal door frames and replace them with stone, as unless they're metal to prevent some sort of splash damage, it's quite pointless having the frame metal when the door is a fraction of that cost to raid. If you didn't choose to build a roof expansion and keep the old heliport, then I would replace it with stone, as small costs like these do add up, and there's really no point to having it in metal, as it doesn't add anything to the raid cost. In all honesty though, this isn't too bad of a design, as it really just needed some external TCs, a bit of an improvement to the shooting areas, and maybe some more space for utility items to make it just that bit better. How about we take a look at the next base coming from X-Raw? Well, the cost comes in at 82 HQM, 8.5k metal frags, and 21k stone, which is reasonable for a trio base. Now, I don't understand if graders are just oblivious to how /cost works, but in most servers it excludes all of your deployables. So, if we add them on, that's another 72 gears, and another 15.7k frags, bringing the total up to 24.2k, which is well above double the original. To top it off, a majority of this cost is completely unnecessary, and this base is the pinnacle of over-the-top garage door use. Really, you could save a lot of metal frags and gears by not placing doors on a majority of these ground areas and second floor, especially on these ridiculous peak downs. These garage doors serve no purpose and add nothing to the raid cost. This metal could instead be used on upgrading the stone honeycomb to metal and actually improving the cost to raid. I also don't understand the point of these metal peak downs. To me they seem entirely wasteful, as they give 0 visibility to anywhere outside of maybe 5 or 10 meters to the ground, making it pretty fucking useless when it comes to defending against an online raid. Now maybe there is some use for them when they're used to stop a door camper, but why are they on every side of the base in replacement of an actual shooting floor? And what really baffles me is this is what's upgraded to metal out of everything in the base, when they add nothing to the honeycomb or the raid cost. Now the roof doesn't really compensate for the lack of online defenses either, as one person with an L96 or a helicopter could easily hop on and camp it, and you wouldn't stand a chance defending it from here. Well, let's see how capable X-Raw's base is at defending itself from raiders. He claims that it is either 1.5k expo ammo to go through the doors or 28 rockets to get to the main loot. Well, first off, using that much expo ammo is a pretty dishonest way to raid a base, especially considering the expo ammo nerf, which would cost the raider an additional 7 AKs just to use all of that 1.5k ammo. Again, claiming 2.8k expo ammo for the entire raid is just ridiculous, considering the fact that you would have already obtained all of the main loot with 1.5k. So why would anyone use that much expo ammo after the nerf just to steal your spare bow kit stored in chests on the second floor? So, how about we actually raid this base and see how honest he was being with his audience? Well, first splash damage the stone walls on the back of the base for 4 rockets. Then do it with another 8 rockets on the metal sections. Then, climb up to get a better angle and rocket in between the 4 garage doors 3 times and you'll get into 4 of the loot rooms for only 15 rockets. Then you can use 200 extra ammo to get through the reinforced window to access TC. By this point you've probably profited, and the last bottom loot room is an optional 450 extra ammo through 3 garage doors. For 15 rockets and 200 extra ammo you've acquired a majority of the loot in this base, as opposed to the supposed 28 rockets or 1.5k extra ammo required for only the main loot. This base well overestimates its total raid cost. For 15 rockets and 650 extra ammo, that's including the last optional loot room, it comes closer to meeting the 28 rocket raid cost supposed for only the main loot, but arguably the last loot room, which makes up a majority of that additional cost, is not worth going for in the first place. You can see that circle bases like these are just too prone to the effects of splash damage, and in my honest opinion are just not worth building. Let's first again improve this base with an optional roof design for the cost including deployables of 7,125 stone, 1.2k frags, 1.5k wood and 2 rope. Then let's strip the base of the old peak downs and replace them with proper window shooting floors and door camping peak spots. Then let's use the metal to upgrade the honeycomb from stone to sheet metal for an additional 4 rockets in the raid cost. This should then bring the total cost of the improved base without the roof section or deployables to keep it comparable to 18,540 stone, 7,540 metal and 82 HQM, with the raid cost increasing to 19 rockets and 200 to 650 expo ammo. Now, I find it incredibly difficult to drastically increase the raid cost when using this circle floor plan because of its issues with splash damage. I personally never use this design for that very reason. It becomes too expensive, too quick to upgrade and honeycomb effectively to increase the raid cost past 24 rockets to main loot. Regardless, the improvements still decrease the cost, increase the cost rate and arguably increase the utility. Well, let's go on to the third base from Dit is Quinn. This base is the definition of over-the-top HQM use, especially with its solo duo tag, as it comes to 17.4k frags, 629 HQM, and 5.6k wood. Well, like most creators, they somehow forgot to add the deployables to their cost, which adds an extra 3.7k frags, 50 HQM, and 20 gears. Well, what do you get for this steep cost? Only 3 loot rooms, a TC area with 0 shooting floors or online defenses, and where a large portion of the raid cost depends upon the use of 2 questionably placed armored doors. To add insult to injury, there are a lot of wasted resources, such as armoring staircases in some of the least efficient loot rooms I've ever seen, having small pointless costs such as the metal foundation stairs, garage doors that don't lead to the core loot room, and many pointless layers of honeycomb. Why add a third metal layer when you can go through 1 metal roof, or on top of that, why have any honeycomb past the second stone layer when you can go through 2 sheet metal doors to get to the armored layer? Well, let's see how this supposed 49 rockets to TC cost holds up. The first way to raid this base is through the foundations, as the way in which these foundations have been placed, due to the TC being lower to the ground, it is very easy to just destroy 1 metal, then 1 armored foundation, and crouch underneath the gap to get to 1 of 3 loot rooms and TC. That's 24 rockets to TC in a loot room. You get more than 1 TC for half of what was advertised. From there, you need to destroy the first garage door for 150 extra ammo, and then shoot 3 rockets into the other 2. Now you have access to all main loot for the low cost of 27 rockets and 150 extra ammo. That's not even close to the 49 rocket raid cost. But let's give benefit of the doubt here, and suppose for some reason that you can't crouch under these foundations. Well, to no one's surprise, going through the doors is also incredibly cheap. First you destroy the 2 sheet metal doors for 126 exp ammo, then continue and at this base's best, destroy the 2 armored double doors for an extra 400 exp ammo. Then destroy the first garage door with 150 exp ammo and pump 3 rockets into the bottom, splashing the floor and both garage doors. Then finally, finish it off by pumping 13 rockets into the armored floor to get to the TC loot. This raid's total cost is 16 rockets, 676 exp ammo, which is around about 28 rockets in total. This method is even cheaper to raid if you just want the loot and care little for the TC. And both are pretty much half of the supposed 49 rockets straight to TC. So, how about we improve this base? First, let's fix up these loot rooms. Now while I despise the use of 1.5 full loot rooms, as the raider profits far too much per room, the placement of the TC being on a lower foundation forces this to be a part of the design. So, now instead of the old 5 large boxes per loot room and armored stairs, we now have 2 12 large box loot rooms and 1 4 large box loot room with a tier 3 for an easy open entrance. Next, let's add metal foundations, as seen in stone, all around the outside of the base to stop that particular crouch raid method from being as effective. Then, let's also fix this base up with a brand new entrance that includes a door peak and a shop front, as well as a bunker base to increase the cost of a door raid. This new entrance has no use for any of the armored double doors, and even still has some of the added benefits such as a drop box. Next, let's remove some of the unnecessary honeycomb. This part of the honeycomb makes the raid 2 walls to the armored layer, but is made instantly redundant when you can just go through 1 roof layer. Now let's remove these low walls used to prevent rocket splash damage. See, they would have been useful if it were not for the lack of splash damage protection on the next layer, because as it stands, the raider can still go through both armored walls at once. With all these changes in mind, while the total cost stayed the same, the raid cost has increased to around 40 rockets, to all of the loot and TC, although the TC makes up 16 rockets of that cost alone. Again, when working with a circle-based floor plan, it becomes incredibly difficult to increase the raid cost past 24 rockets without expending too much HQM, which I argue this base does use an excessive amount of. And no, I wouldn't even bother adding a shooting floor to this base, as its high HQM use already takes the toll on upkeep, requiring 111 HQM per day. With a small shooting floor you see here, it already increases to 143 HQM per day, and in my opinion, that's not worthwhile. You are better off just building a separate base. And now, let's take a look at the final base coming from Hoodie71. Now this video was confusing as it did not include the cost and half of the doors weren't ever placed, which left me wondering if they were ever meant to be put down in the first place, so the reconstruction may not be 100% accurate. Now, this base works by using 4 suicide bunkers, so of course it can boast a high raid cost. Now I don't know how you choose to enjoy Rust, but 4 suicide bunkers is just impractical. Even with the 3 beds and 1 bag set up, you would still have to wait around 11 minutes to access all of your most important loot. Now imagine that you're in an online scenario, where you ran out of ammo. Well, you have to spawn in your base, wait for the bag timer, spawn on your bed, get out the sulfur, GP, metal frags, put them into the transfer box, then die, wait for the bag timer, spawn, grab the loot from the transfer box, and then you can run back up to your tier 3 and begin crafting ammo. That to me does not sound like an enjoyable or practical way to play this game. Now on top of that, maybe you need components for gear or guns. Well, that's another 5 minutes in waiting time going from bed to bag in your base. And don't even give me the excuse, oh I play in a small group so we have 1 person for each bunker. Well, I don't know how dedicated your group is, but I get annoyed when my group logs off with important BPs. Now imagine that a member of your group logged off with a component access, or sulfur access, or access to all of your kits, or all of your frags, stone, wood and HQM. Well then you're just fucked. Now maybe this is the best design for some, because the number 1 cause of losing loot is going out and dying with it, so at least you'll be glad to know that your bag timers prevent you from playing the game. Well, on top of all that, this base has many unnecessary honeycomb and metal sections. Example, the shooting floor, which is just wasteful, adds nothing to the honeycomb, so I ask, why is it even metal? The total cost of this base comes around about to 33,310 frags and 552 HQM, plus an additional 39 gears and 8,250 frags for all the important deployables. The upkeep cost came around about to 9.5k frags and 127 HQM, which is quite a bit more than the advertised 6k frags and 110 QM on the thumbnail. Now, for either of those upkeep costs, whether his was accurate or not, you could build one of these baseline bases every day, which arguably does have a higher raid cost per loot room. So for this high raid cost and use of impractical suicide bunkers, let's see how this base withstands in a raid. Hoodie71 claimed this base to be able to withstand 100 rockets. Well, I imagine that was calculated if you raided the base through each one of the 4 outside walls. As shown here, first you rocket the metal wall for 8 rockets. Use another 8 rockets to destroy the rest of the surrounding walls while splashing the armored layer. Then continue to use the last 8 rockets to get into the HQM bunker. Now, the garage door did get hit with some splash damage if you aim the rocket in the top left corner, so after those 8 rockets, it'll get destroyed as well. In total, to get into one bunker and its adjacent loot room, you'd need 24 rockets. Multiply that by 4 for each loot room, and you'll get up to 96 rockets for this raid. However, this as always is not the cheapest way to raid, as you can go through the doors. So to start off, use 576 extra ammo to get through the sheet metal, ladder hatch and garage doors. Then use 3 rockets to splash damage the 2 garage doors, and then pump another 16 rockets down the drop down, and you'll open up the HQM bunker and the second loot room. Continue through the base using 3 rockets on the garage doors and 16 rockets on the HQM bunker and adjacent loot room, until you reach the last garage door. Then use another 150 extra ammo and 16 rockets down the drop down. So in total, the raid cost is 726 extra ammo plus 73 rockets, which equals around about 86 rockets. Quite a bit less than the advertised 100 rocket raid. Now again, while this might seem like an impressive raid cost, it relies solely on the use of 4 suicide bunkers to work. First off, to improve this base, let's start by removing the shooting floor. As shown earlier, on a base with this much HQM, upkeeping a shooting floor is just unsustainable. I'd also then remove all of the unnecessary honeycomb and place a bunker at the entrance of the base to make door raiding more expensive. This is what the final strip version should look like, and it'll cost a minimum of 94 rockets to get through. Now, I can't begin to express how much I dislike using this floor plan or bunker based design, as it's incredibly impractical and the bunkers are not far enough apart to even upkeep the 1 metal and 1 armored wall raid cost per loot room. This final cost comes down to 23.1k frags, 6.5k stone, and 552 HQM. That's about 10k frags off of the original. The new upkeep is much lower as well, coming in at only 5,381 frags, 108 HQM, and 1,179 stone, much lower than the original 127 HQM and 9.5k frags. There was a pretty common theme across all of these base reviews, which included overestimating raid costs and using unnecessary honeycomb. I didn't even really put these bases to the test in an online scenario, which if the players didn't defend properly, the raid costs would be much cheaper than even what I listed. Now, I don't believe that any of these creators intentionally misrepresented their raid costs, and I understand that they probably just didn't fully check out their base, but when a majority of the bases reviewed had their raid costs almost halved, I think a little more caution needs to be taken in the future. In all honesty, I just hate seeing bases that claim X amount of rockets, when in reality, they're only a fraction of that cost. I mean, look at Evilverse for example. If he builds a base that's only 19 rockets to TC, he'll state it straight up. It doesn't have to have a 100 rocket raid cost to be an effective base. But anyway, I spent a little too much time curating this vid, so if you enjoyed, I'd appreciate any support. If you'd like to see me review more bases, cause there are plenty more, then hit me up with some links or tell me, and I'll be sure to dedicate a whole vid just to that topic. But for now, I hope you enjoy the content, and thanks for sticking around. And remember, there's a part 2 coming soon talking about the bunker base meta.